Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. We're coming to you live from the Singapore Fintech Festival, and joining me for this segment, we have Patel, Executive Director at Elevandi. We're going to discuss resilient business models for fintech companies, and it's great to be back on the ground with you in Singapore, and we're in the middle of a fintech downturn globally with funding for fintech. It's not a surprise that it's in a decline. What models and frameworks are being discussed among delegates to really bolster the industry during this downturn?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and it's the talk of the festival ultimately. So I think there is a kind of movement back to those first principles. And if you think fintech over the years has been awash with funding, and the streets aren't paved with gold anymore. This year alone, we've seen 850 billion wiped off the top 10 fintechs valuations. And so a lot of people are talking about kind of, back to these first business principles, thinking differently about what success metrics looks like. So a lot of people talk about unicorns, but what value does that term have in society today? And ultimately you could be an organization that is valued at $1 billion, but you may not have any margins. And so there is a change in belief and opinions now, and VCs are clearly kind of driving this a little bit further, because in the past, some venture capitalists have been prioritizing, or advice in terms of, growth over runway.
Right. And
now that we're in a downturn, this change is beginning to happen. So there is that element, the viability element, but the second one is around responsibility. So we're beginning to see people have a social and moral kind of compass, and that's been involved in a lot of the talks, but organizations are beginning to change the way that they, how they behave and the decisions that they make. I think MasterCard is a great example of linking bonuses based on ESG goals. So what they've set themselves out for just ultimately inspires the organization and incentivizes the organization to do more and do better.
Right. And despite the downturn, there's over 60,000 people here, right? The attendee list is quite impressive. You have the world's most influential people from the public and private sector. How is this mix helping to devise new solutions for the fintech industry?
Yeah. So ultimately, the festival, its genesis is bringing policymakers and regulators together with the industry. And so that doesn't happen in fintech events or fintech activities around the world. And so that is the sweet spot. And so what we've created is something called Elevandi Insights Forum, which is away from the hustle and bustle of these 6 huge halls. And it's kind of upstairs on the second floor here, where we have these smaller roundtables going on with like 30 to 40 to 60 people, all discussing a particular topic over 2-hour periods. And so we're working closely with the Monetary Authority of Singapore here, working closely with the Swiss government, the Milken Institute here as well, the Bank of International Settlements, and even the International Monetary Fund as well, so the IMF are here. And they're all running point roundtables that bring together leaders on the public side and the private side to address whether it's tokenization, whether it's around kind of sustainability and greening the financial system, or even artificial intelligence and ethics. And so we've covered these multiple topics. There's about 25 of them. And so ultimately, at the end of these kind of roundtables, what we're really hoping is great white papers that come out of these, but also further discussions. And they'll be taken further in 2023, where we have a huge roadmap where we'll be traveling around the world.
Yeah, well, so Pat, at the end of Singapore Fintech Festival, what will success look like to you?
So Elevandi ultimately is an organization that was spun out from the MES, and we don't see the numbers from the event. That's not what drives us forward, and that's not part of our KPIs. Obviously, we have to have a large volume of people here, but success for us is that if we've moved the industry in a positive way. And so that whole resilience, business model resilience, is a thematic this year. And so if we have inspired the next wave of entrepreneurs to think differently, maybe than their previous generation, those that were around for last year and the year before, where it was easier to get kind of funding, what we're trying to do here is inspire that next wave to think long and hard about your business model. The viability element, the responsibility element, but also the inclusivity. And so these are the things that we hope to kind of permeate around the industry. So that's kind of one. It's difficult to measure, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But ultimately what we'll do is take some of these conversations onto the next activities we run. So we'll be going to Zurich working with the Swiss government in June. Then we go to Africa as well, and we're still working out the dates for that, and we're working with a number of the African governments to launch an activity, a forum, and then obviously come back here as well in November 2023. So it's continuing the dialogue and ensuring that as an industry we can continually advance the fringes of where we currently are.
Yeah, well, African fintech environment is super exciting and a lot to look forward to for there. If for those of us in the industry that were perhaps not able to make it to SFF this year, what can they do to get involved and participate in future dialogues in the fintech industry?
Sure. So Elevandi as an organization is looking to create a number of year-round activities. So obviously I've mentioned a few already, but one of the interesting ones that we piloted, there's actually two that I'd like to mention. One is something called the Capital Meets Policy Dialogue. So we brought policymakers and regulators together with family offices, venture capitalists, CVCs, sovereign wealth funds, and ultimately to try and get them together to start to talk as a community, because investors need to know what that policy roadmap looks like, and that will ultimately decide where they deploy that capital. And so bringing those audiences together really starts to create an area of fintech where you can start to double down in certain verticals. And so we'll take that formula, which was very successful on Tuesday, and start to do that through the year round in different locations. And then the other one, I'm not sure if you've had time to see it, is the Founders Peak. So we brought 50 founders together from around the world to share a TED-type talk. So not about their company, not about their products that they're selling. Ultimately, it's about a lived experience, an untold story that they want to share with the world. Ultimately, it's something around where it's got, that piece of advice or guidance that's got them to where they are today. And so these stories will start to be kind of released through videos over the course of the year, and we hope to kind of influence current entrepreneurs, but also the future founders.
Right. All right.
Yep.
Pat, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me throughout the Singapore Fintech Festival. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Market Reporter at Nasdaq.